Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Ahead of the Dutch Grand Prix, Ferrari have indicated their skepticism that Red Bull are really able to implement as many upgrades as they have so far this season and continue to do so. Mattia Binotto has said he'd be very surprised indeed if Red Bull were really capable of bringing all the upgrades that they have brought, and potentially implying that there might be some foul play going on from the budget perspective. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Pretty much a flawless weekend, of course, for Max Verstappen and Red Bull back in Spa. Even Helmut Marko said he'd have won from 20th on the grid. He'd have probably won from his own driveway, to be honest, back in Spa, given the pace that that car had on the weekends. And I mean, he'd have certainly won from the pit lane more than likely, especially the safety car would have caught him up to the field and all that type of stuff as well. So, I mean, yeah, of course, ends up winning from 14th regardless. But Ferrari are concerned, understandably, I think, from their perspective, as to how Red Bull are somehow able to extract so much performance. And not just the upgrades they've brought recently, but apparently Red Bull have more upgrades to come, not just for this year, but for next year as well, and are still relatively significantly over the weight limit, and therefore there's even more time to find from that Red Bull car. So Ferrari are sitting there thinking, hang on a second, lads, like we brought some upgrades. Red Bull have brought a lot of upgrades this year and continue to do so. How is it possible that the Red Bull are getting away with this, right? How can they keep getting away with this? And then Ferrari are like, well, hang on a second, can the FIA really police this and make sure that Red Bull are actually doing things okay? I mentioned the idea a couple of weeks ago, okay, what if you do some development and some research in a factory that's, you know, completely unrelated to the F1 team? I think this probably applies more to regular teams rather than Red Bull because they don't produce regular cars. But in theory, there could be ways around the budget cap, and Ferrari are not convinced that Red Bull are doing everything by the book. So this is what Mattia Binotto says. I think we've already talked about it over the course of the season because we now have the technical, sporting, and even financial regulation. So new from this year effectively is the cost cap in place, $140 million the teams were able to spend on effectively all things for the season. Now that got upped by, I think, was it 3% or something, in line with some sort of inflationary bonus they gave it due to additional costs for transport and energy in the factories and wind tunnels and this type of stuff. So they've upped it a little bit, and that has definitely helped some teams bring further upgrades, but still Ferrari are skeptical. They say which can make the difference between teams in the way they interpret and perform them, and we know we need an FIA very strong to have adequate attention, otherwise the regulations themselves will not be fair and equitable. So the rumour has it, we'll see here in a second, that Red Bull are introducing a lighter monocoque, an entirely new chassis, a lighter chassis that will cost them at least a few $1 million here to prepare, because they have to prepare like 3 different chassis, one to get tested for the regulations, right, to make sure that it complies with the safety stuff, and then 2 for each, well, 1 for each car, right? So there's a lot of cost that goes involved in this, and Ferrari is saying, well, like, look, I can't judge Red Bull by the lightness of their frame, but at Ferrari, we would never be able to introduce such a light frame or a different strategy over the course of the season simply for budget reasons. I would be very surprised if other teams were able to do that. The reasons are once again to be found in the regulation itself. Is it fair enough? Is control less efficient? It's a big question mark. As we said, at the moment, it's a very green regulation. I suppose talking about the kind of budget cap side, the number of people who control it within the FIA is very low. So it needs to improve for the future, because it would be very bad if a championship was somehow dictated by a financial regulation and not a technical or sporting one. It's very interesting, right, saying that the FIA people, they don't really have a massive team that is involved in monitoring the budget stuff. And that's the thing, like, auditing this must be such a nightmare, right? Like, to some extent, the FIA have to trust the teams on their, like, I think, what was it, Toto Wolff said that every time that a new part comes out of the bus or whatever, out of the truck, they have the accountants noting it down, adding it to list and all this type of stuff. Like, of course, they've got to do that, but then how does the FIA really audit that and go through and check whether they're actually being completely fair, these teams? Because obviously there's a great incentive to find any possible loophole that these big teams can spend more money than, you know, of course, the cost cap is one of these things that in theory, it sounds great, right? Every team can spend the same, but, you know, the biggest teams with the most money have the most incentive to find ways around it, and Mattia thinks that it might be kind of a, you know, a state of the law of unintended consequences where Red Bull and other teams are going to find ways around this. And Ferrari are probably sitting there thinking, damn, are Red Bull finding a way around this? Can we find a way around this? Like, that is a new battleground now on the, you know, you've got to hire the good accountants, not just the good engineers, right? Which is, you know, maybe not where we want the sport to be, who knows? But maybe it's a good thing for other perspectives as well. But of course, some would argue that, well, Red Bull's so far ahead at the moment that we need to unlock the budget cap so that Mercedes, Ferrari can spend more money to catch up. If they can't spend more money to catch up, then Red Bull will stay ahead forever, which is maybe not a good argument, but it's one that I've seen made a couple of different places so far. So that's also this thing about this new monocoque, right? So the rumor has it, Red Red Bull are planning to introduce a new monocoque in the season's final phase. So I don't think, maybe they already did that, or maybe they haven't done that yet, but they reckon it's going to save them a few kilograms if it's allowed by the rules and the safety tests and stuff, and therefore, like, they can save 2-3 tenths of a second per lap, which obviously is pretty massive as well, given their current advantage they had at Spa. And Bonotto says we would never be able to afford to do that because the budget doesn't allow it. And he obviously, as we saw, would say he'd be very surprised if any team was capable of doing that, implying a heavy dose of skepticism that Red Bull are fiddling the numbers to a certain extent to allow them to do this. Of course, like, Red Bull are going to categorically deny any of those accusations, but it is interesting nonetheless. Is this Ferrari getting salty that their car is so slow, or do they have an actual fair point here, and that the FA need to either put more people on this task to try and ensure this doesn't get out of hand and it's not just a financial championship rather than, you know, an actual sporting championship? Would be an interesting question. This just to mention real quick, because Ferrari, I mean, the article title is interesting here because it said they're not concerned by the straight line deficit, which is kind of accurate with what they said in the article, but it's not because they're not concerned at all. They said they're just massively concerned by the fact that Red Bull managed to have low drag but still generate a lot of downforce in the corners where Ferrari aren't capable of that. So they reckon that because, at Monza they're going to run a low downforce rear wing anyway, they're not too concerned by the straight line speeds, but they're certainly more concerned by what the Red Bull can potentially do in the corners, even with the lower downforce setup, where of course they've been very strong recently as well. Zandvoort, of course, could be a different story. Max Verstappen has indicated that yes, he does expect Ferrari to be strong there because more downforce required in Zandvoort. Pretty high downforce track in general, so maybe not maximum downforce, but you're kind of getting there, to be honest. I think Mercedes mentioned that they've got plenty of rear wings they can choose from here, so I think they'll be hoping they can find something that works. But of course, yes, Max Verstappen's home turf in Zandvoort, but he does expect Ferrari to be more competitive next weekend. This, just to close out the video with, I thought was interesting here because Ferrari kind of do an explanation video, and one of their guys here says, look, the idea to pit for the fastest lap didn't work as planned, but like, if we don't go for these opportunities, we are no longer racers. So I'm inclined to agree here, to be honest. Like, obviously people are saying, wow, this guy thinks he's Ayrton Senna or something, but I don't know, I think it's kind of fair enough. At the end of the day, the risk to me that was taken there was, I think they were always going to get Alonso back, and they knew that even if they didn't get the fastest lap. The problem, of course, was the 5-second penalty that Charles got speeding into the pits. Now, of course, if he knew and the team knew that sensor failed on the car that prevented it being so easy for him to tell how quick he was going, then maybe they shouldn't have done it. So maybe that was the mistake rather than the decision in and of itself. But very much enjoyed your thoughts and all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.